Thank you for still being here. And for those of you who just arrived, welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Finn Myrstad. I am several things, but I am the co-chair of something called the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, which is a network of around 80 consumer groups in Europe and the US. And I have been asked to moderate this discussion today. In my day job, I'm also Director of Digital Policy at the Norwegian Consumer Council, so I do a lot of digital stuff. And I've been asked to moderate this really exciting panel today on a very relevant topic that is hot in both the US and in Europe. And we also have a really excellent panel with us. And I'm just going to see if the last panelist has arrived. Jon, he was just here. I can't see him, but maybe he is somewhere in the shadows of the internet. If not, I'm sure he's right around the corner. So I'll start by introducing the other speakers. We have with us Nicole Gill from Accountable Tech, which is she's a co-founder and executive director. Accountable Tech is a US-based nonprofit organization that advocates for structural reforms to repair our information ecosystem, foster healthier and more equitable democracy. They've also led a massive coalition in the US to ban surveillance-based advertising. And Nicole is an experienced campaigner, having led efforts around tax policy, marriage equality, and healthcare before. Thank you so much for being with us. We also have Jan Penfret, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at EDRI, one of the organizers of Privacy Camp. And he leads their work, and does a lot of things. He leads their work on platform regulation. He leads the work on platform regulation on the DSA and DMA. And in the past, before he joined EDRI, he has a life as a tech reporter and founded a privacy training center, and is an overall very experienced and knowledgeable expert on all things tech. And I personally turn to him all the time when I need advice on European policy stuff. So he's an amazing person as well. And we also had with us Jon von Tetzchner. He was here just a minute ago, so I'm sure he's coming back very soon, who is the CEO of the privacy-friendly browser Vivaldi. And he's one of the real pioneers of the internet and has been involved for a very long time, work on different internet issues. And he's also the former founder and CEO of the Opera browser, and is also a well-known advocate for privacy, and represents today a very important business perspective in this discussion. So just to frame it very briefly before we dive in, and I'm going to make this hopefully a very dynamic discussion with the help of everyone participating. So I've already shared with you a pad where you can ask questions and write comments. Their link is in the chat here, and you can also raise your hand if you want to ask questions, and I'll try to take questions at least towards the end, but maybe also before if possible. So the discussion about surveillance-based advertising has been really heating up the last few years in Europe and in the US. And it's at the core of the big tech's business model and the entire ad tech industry on relying on extensive tracking and profiling of individuals, and then micro-target ads back at them based on their behavioral history, relationships, and supposed identity. And in the last year, civil society and SMEs have mass mobilized in Europe and in the US against this type of surveillance. And today, we're going to try to dig into why that is. Why is this an important issue? And what can we do about it? And hopefully, when you leave today, you'll feel both motivated and you'll feel inspired to do something concrete to help reach this goal. So I wanted to start with some open-ended questions to all three panelists to get the conversation going. And let's start with you, Nicole. And the question for all three of you is, why is a ban on surveillance-based advertising important? Why should we care, and why should we do something? And why should politicians act to regulate this space better?
Thank you, Finn, and thank you to all the organizations hosting this panel that was thrown together quite quickly after a very busy last week on the surveillance advertising front, a great week. So surveillance advertising is really important to address because it is the core of the business model that funds and fuels social media companies, especially. They have built their services as ostensibly free, but the cost is really extracting thousands and thousands of data points on all of us, whether or not you use those social media platforms or not. They have a file on you, and they are able to sell that data to the highest bidder in order to serve you ads that really follow you around the internet and surveil you. And what this does is it really promotes content that stokes engagement. And what stokes engagement? The most outrageous content. And so the surveillance advertising business really funds discrimination, division, and delusion. And that is, we at Accountable Tech believe that banning surveillance advertising is necessary in order to reclaim our democracy. I think democracy, both in the United States and globally, is at a turning point. And part of that, the reason we're at this point, is because of the role of online communities, social media companies, and big tech that is able to use their business model and appeal to their shareholders above all else at the risk of democracy.
Thank you very much for that opening remark. And I want to ask you on the same question. Why is this important from your perspective? And welcome, John, for joining. I know there were some technical problems. You were here early, actually. So welcome. And you'll get the question last then. Yeah.
Thank you, Finn. I think maybe let me add this. In a European context, we often get the question, and I'm sure in the US, Nicole, you got the same question sometimes, but I think in Europe, it's easier to ask this question because people can point to GDPR. So the question we get is, why do we need a ban on surveillance advertising? We've already got GDPR. Isn't this supposed to protect our data in a context such as online advertising? And in a way it is. And yet we've seen over and over again since GDPR came into force that somehow this wasn't enough. Now, why isn't this enough? And I think, you've got all the consent framework that GDPR creates where people shouldn't, where companies shouldn't be supposed to be allowed to use personal data without people's consent for the purpose of targeting them with advertising. And yet, as well as GDPR works in a lot of different data processing contexts, when it comes to online advertising, we've seen over and over again in the past years that the consent framework has failed people in practice and that it doesn't provide the protections that it was supposed to provide. And as a result, after lots and lots of discussions we had with civil society, academics, even industry people, we realized that there is almost no way to fix this in terms of regulation to make it work for people. And if that's the case, well, our conclusion was the only way that we can realistically achieve actual protection for people is by banning the technology altogether. And again, for the purpose of showing online advertising. And I also want to remind very quickly that when we say online advertising, this is not only shoe ads or car ads that you get. This is any message that anybody with money in their pockets wants to push onto your screen. It can be a political message, can be an opinion, can be lies, can be anything. And I think this is why this is so problematic.
Thank you for that opening, Jan. I think you highlighted some very important points, and I'm really glad to have with us a person from the business or from the industry side as well. I introduced you, Jan, when you were outside, but I said you've been working on tech-related issues for several decades and have pioneered different technologies and has had an inside view to how it is to operate on the internet from the early days all until today. And you've taken a pretty strong stand and written a letter together with other companies urging both US policymakers and European policymakers to ban surveillance-based ads. Why is that?
I mean, like you said, I've been on the web since the very beginning. I mean, basically since 1992. And I guess my thinking was always this: it's a beautiful thing. The main thing for us to do is to get everyone online, because equal access to information moves the world forward and the like. And that was really the feeling for a long time. And then it changed about 10 years ago. And I really think what we are seeing is a misuse of data and the like. I mean, in some ways, I don't really understand how any of what is happening can be legal at all. For me, when I was working at Telenor Research, and we are learning about, okay, you can't really share anything with anyone. How can it be that you can share it with everyone? I mean, is it basically you have data, you keep it safe, or do you share it with everyone? And something has gone terribly wrong. And I think what we've seen over the last few years, there's a lot of consequences with regards to obviously misinformation and the ability to influence us based on who we are. But also there's a lot of businesses that are doing a lot worse than they used to do in the past. I mean, 10 years ago, most of the news sites actually had free content. There was no paywalls at all, really, at that time. That's a very big change. And I think a lot of that has happened with regards to the change in the systems. Now, I would go further than you guys when it comes to the regulation, because I really think we are kind of enabling spyware. And just because they've been doing this for 10 years doesn't give them the right to continue to do so. I don't think any company should be allowed to collect information and profile their users. I mean, I think it's outrageous. And whether you use it for advertisement or for other purposes, the problem is that from a security perspective, it's a massive problem. Information, whatever everyone is doing, is potentially available either through, that is basically as it is today, you can buy access to the audience by buying rights to this information, or it could be leaked. I mean, basically profiling of every individual in the European Union or the US is available as something that you can hack one way or another. I mean, I really think this is a massive security problem. And one of the concerns that I have with going with a similar solution that we had with GDPR is that we are basically legalizing this. With GDPR, when you're showing the dialogue is supposed to ask for consent. The problem with that, you see the dialogue whether the consent is inconsequential or significant. And no one reads the text anyway. So the only thing you really as a user see, you see a dialogue saying, can I spy on you or can I collect your information? And either you have the view, okay, I have to do this because that's what I have to do. And you're more likely to say yes to the bigger guys because you don't want to have not access to your most used services or your phones. And then you might then be blocking some smaller parties that really don't matter in the big picture. Or you're basically giving kind of access to, I mean, you're giving access to everyone or no one. And that really isn't working. So I think we have a significant problem. And I think there's a risk that the solution actually creates a bigger problem, because I think some of the big guys, what they've been asking for is regulation. Because if they can point at regulation and they're staying inside the regulation in some way, then they've gotten an okay to continue doing what they're doing, which is wrong. It's spying on users shouldn't be legal. Building profiles on users shouldn't be legal. And by the way, you can provide all these services that you like without doing that. They try to make straw arguments either with regards to not being able to provide the services, or they try to push some smaller companies or otherwise to talk their messaging. But the reality, they pushed people into a box. They've taken away what was a working business model and replaced it with another one. And obviously, if you take away the new one, you will have a problem for a little while you go back to a more sane way of dealing with ads on the internet.
Yeah. Thank you, John. That's a very, very strong message. And I think we should delve into that a little bit later as well, is what would the internet look like if we manage to get these bans through, and possibly other measures as well to sort of reduce or completely remove the surveillance. But before we go there, I'd like to ask Jan and Nicole just a question on there has been obviously now two different policy processes going on. One has been going on for a while in Europe, out in the open, but also in the US, Accountable Tech has been pushing with a huge alliance of organizations from all sorts, all walks of the different civil society lives, and really pushing for for legislation in this area. So Nicole, could you just briefly, for the audience who are not familiar with the very recent developments in the US, both from Congress, but also from a consultation from the FTC, which you have opened up through your organization. Could you just tell us briefly what those initiatives are about and what would sort of come from them?
Yeah. So last week on Tuesday, legislation was introduced in the US Congress that would ban surveillance advertising. It is literally called the Banning Surveillance Advertising Act. And it was put forth by Representative Anna Eshoo, who actually represents Silicon Valley, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, and Representative Jan Schakowsky. And what this does is lays out very simply a ban on surveillance advertising. It makes one or two exceptions for geography, but otherwise is an outright ban. And we were extremely heartened to see this from a representative whose constituents include the big tech companies who rely on this business model. And it's the first time that legislation of its sort has been introduced in the United States Congress. You all in the EU have been far ahead of us in terms of actual legislating around this, and we're trying to play catch up a little bit here. And the Ban Surveillance Advertising Act is one part of that. The second that you also mentioned, Finn, is through the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC. And a lot of this is to do from President Biden. His administration has really established that he very clearly supports the reining in of big tech through regulation of both competition and content. And to that end, he has installed Lina Khan as chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, and she has really revitalized antitrust law in the United States. And so under this new regime at the FTC, Accountable Tech submitted kind of a novel petition in the fall of last year, asking the Federal Trade Commission to initiate what is called a rulemaking process, which is their process of updating rules and regulations to ban surveillance advertising. And right now that is up for open comment. And so anyone can submit a comment to the Federal Trade Commission actually up until tomorrow night at midnight with their take on this and why they might support the ban of surveillance advertising from their unique perspective, because there is a lot of different reasons to come at this. So those are the two big developments that we've been a part of over the last few months, and we're excited to see some developments on our side of the pond.
Yeah, no, it was really encouraging to see. And I know you've been working very hard in the background to achieve both those two great developments. Have you received any pushback, industry pushback, political pushback on these proposals? I'm sure you have. What sort of pushback do you get?
Yeah, actually, there was a report out, I think on Friday last week, that showed that in the United States, big tech broke their own record for the amount of money they have spent on lobbying last year. Just 7 companies spent $70 million lobbying the United States Congress. And that of course does not take into account any number of front groups, these, so-called kind of impartial advocacy organizations that they have funded, or think tanks that they are putting money behind to get studies out that support their point of view. And so I think what you're seeing, and Jan, I'm sure you can comment on this from the European perspective, is big tech is scared. They're really quite nervous for the first time that not only regulators and legislators, but consumers might be catching on to the game they've been playing with all of us. And so we're seeing quite a bit of pushback, but in a way that's quite heartening to know that we are really hitting at the core of the problem here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think the issue of consumers or citizens is something we should also how can we get people involved in this. And I really think that we've seen, it seems to me at least, that there's been a huge shift here. And I would agree with you that the fact that they're spending so much money on lobbying is a sign that this has hit a nerve. Jan, just drawing on that, what's happening in Europe for those who are not too familiar with the Brussels bubble?
So in Europe, big tech companies have done similar things. The amount of resources they have thrown into fighting the proposals that we've been putting forward on a European level is just mind-blowing. And it actually makes me quite happy to see that this is such, as you say, has touched on a nerve. And it's true that we have been slightly ahead in Europe with legislative reform, but now I'm worried that the US could catch up because it's kind of, who knows what's going on, how this will end in the European Union. So what we've had on a European level is, and I think most of you have heard of this, is the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, DSA and DMA. Both laws touch upon the use of data, of personal data for, by these big companies. And so when the DSA came out, there was nothing on banning surveillance advertising in that law. And when we looked at this, we thought, why don't we use this opportunity to push for something stronger? If we already make a law for online platforms, more broadly defined, then why don't we use this opportunity to go after the business model and try to mitigate the harms that we see are coming from surveillance advertising? And that's what we did, and we tried to get members of the European Parliament on board and started talking about this. And over the course of a year, 1.5 years. This has really caught fire and started to be really interesting for people, and that's how we ended up now with a position from the European Parliament, which doesn't go all the way to a full ban of surveillance advertising, unfortunately, because that was in the end a question of majorities also, which you need to get in the parliament. But it does at least have a partial ban in it. What it does is that the provision says you cannot use particularly sensitive types of personal data for the purpose of targeting advertising. So sensitive types of data are already defined in the GDPR, so that makes it easy. That's stuff like health data, information about sexual preferences, religious or political opinions, these kind of things, psychological profiles. So all of this stuff that's currently used to target people with content would in the future not be possible to use anymore. And again, this is not a full ban, but I think it's goes further than what we had in the past, and it's beefed up even a little bit more with a second provision that goes after the use of dark patterns. And I know, Finn, you at the NCC, you've worked a lot on dark patterns, and we've drawn a lot also from, have based our work on the research you've been doing. And so there's a provision now that would explicitly prohibit any use of dark patterns by these companies. And I think this would also kind of help at least partially fix the problem that we see with the GDPR's consent framework at the moment. So that is, all of that is not decided yet in a final vote. We'll have to see now that we convince all the 27, or at least as many as possible of the 27 member states in the EU to make sure that this gets a majority. But I'm hopeful that in one form or another, these provisions will make it into the final law.
Thank you so much. And I want to just remind the audience, you can still ask questions in the chat. You can ping me directly. You can use the pad. I've shared the link in the chat as well, where you can ask questions, and we'll soon open up for questions and comments as well. But Jon, I mean, you work representing actually a commercial interest in this, and as I mentioned, you've been very loud, and here in this panel, I mean, you're very, very clear in your messages. What would you say are good business arguments as well for I mean, you have teamed up with several other companies. You've now speaking out at events. You've been meeting with policymakers when invited, et cetera. What are you telling policymakers that what's the business argument for such a ban?
Well, I think, it's partly a question of what do you allow businesses to do. And is it fair that certain companies can be basically allowed to spy on users? Is it natural that that is something that should be allowed to do? I mean, I also think that the message that if you look 10 years back and you look at the history of the internet was working just fine without this stuff. Now, these guys, they would like to tell you that the internet was built on these technologies, and that's not true. That is literally a lie. There were no working business models on this until probably around 2010, I would say, that kind of started to change. And I think also it's quite visible at the time that there was, you had, as I said, free newspapers and the like that have had to change their business model because with the change to surveillance-based ads, their revenues would go down. Because, basically it's a question of, in the early days of the internet, you had a significant difference in price based on location, right? So if you're going to a quality location, you would have to pay quite a lot for visibility there. But if you were kind of putting in an unknown location or the like, you would get 100th of the value for the ads. So the big change is because the ads follow the person, you would get potentially much more paid in a really bad location. So there's a change there in the dynamics of things, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. But I think in any case, we have to look at what is this doing to society. Whenever you do a change, there's winners and losers. And the fact that certain companies have been allowed to spy on their users and build profiles, that's given them an income, and it does create winners and losers in the advertising model system. I think we could easily go back to more of a location-based, kind of contextual-based advertisement model, and we would get rid of a lot of these issues. I really think that asking users to make a decision on whether to allow spying on them or not is unreasonable. I also think that basically having it unclear what you can collect of information and the like is also a problem. You have to make it very, very clear where the line is and what you can do with data and what you can't do with data. And I'm a little bit concerned that what these companies are trying to do is to water out the arguments and that you end up with something that kind of doesn't work. And we've seen that happen before. We've taken the fight with companies like Microsoft before to the EU. I think the EU has shown a willingness to take on the fight, which is very admirable. But at the same time, we've also seen that the guys are pretty good at finding loopholes, and that's a problem. Now, I always have to ask these large companies, do they feel that this is okay? The employees at those companies, can they look themselves in the eyes and think, okay, what I'm doing is okay? The algorithm that I make actually divides people into camps. Is that okay? If I made an algorithm like that, I would throw it away and rewrite it or something. But the part of the problem is, again, there's a slippery slope there, and you're starting with the data that you're allowing to be used in those algorithms. And I think if you take that data away and you don't allow to use kind of personal information that's been collected or otherwise, then the algorithms will do much less damage. Like the kind of initial phase of a lot of these systems was basically, okay, you see what your friends post, and you see it at the top, and there isn't any kind of manipulation of the content by third parties or the algorithm. So anyway, I really think we have to think about kind of society in this as well. Businesses are part of society, and we should be doing things to help society and not undermine our societies.
Thank you very much, John, for those very strong words. And I think coming from a businessman such as yourself makes them even stronger, I think, at times, because from those of us from civil society, we're often attacked for not having, wanting to kill off the internet and wanting to take the toys away from people. And I think what you're saying here is that it's possible to do business and still respect the basic fundamental rights, which as a moderator, I should post my own opinion, but I would personally agree to that. Jan and Nicole, do you want to comment to that? Or just raise your hands if you want to sort of get a word. Otherwise, I have a question. So what can we, these companies are global companies. They have international lobby operations. They're coordinated. Civil society groups tend to be local or national. and rarely sort of global. So how can we learn from each other? How can we coordinate? And how can we achieve results? I think we already achieved amazing results, but the discussions are not over. In Europe, the DSA is going into negotiations, so-called trilogues on EU speak, and in the US, this is a proposed law, so lots is left to be done. What can we learn from the process we've been involved in, and how can we sort of move this forward? Who wants to go first?
I can start. I think the representation of the four of us on this call is a really good place to begin. And I've been really heartened by the role of business in this fight, and especially smaller tech companies in the United States using their voice and speaking out. Business owners and businesses tend to have a bit of an outsized influence in the United States, I would say, especially when it comes to legislating. And so those businesses using their power behind this issue has been heartening. The other piece I'd say is, we and Jan and Finn, you've been a part of this effort, created a transatlantic coalition to call for a ban on surveillance advertising. And that was really the first effort of its kind. And I like to think that also was a bit of a warning shot to some of these companies. The fact that we are, using technology to collaborate together and to share information and to learn from one another in order to push legislation across the finish line, hopefully. And what we as a community have realized is, and we see this with GDPR, with all of its shortcomings, I in the United States see those pop-ups asking me to accept or reject cookies. And GDPR is not the law of the land in the United States. And that's because we know that when we push tech companies to have to follow laws in specific jurisdictions, it is often to their advantage to make that change globally. And so pushing for change in the EU, interesting work that has happened in Australia over the past few years, and the work we're doing in the United States, it's really all connected. And all of us working together has helped advance, I think, this issue in the past year, probably more than any of us could have ever expected.
Jan or Jon, do you want to comment?
I can maybe quickly second that and say, when we spoke to European policymakers, we had the impression that they were very closely looking at what the US was doing, and the stronger and the louder the debate in the US was around surveillance advertising, the more that was also heard in Europe, and people were paying attention, saying, "Hey, wait, isn't Europe supposed to be the front runner in this kind of question?" And I think that was really incredibly useful. Maybe let me just also go one step back to something Jon said about how people working for these companies how can they look in the mirror in the mornings? I don't have a clear answer for that, but just to give you an example about the level of, dare I say, evilness that this kind of work sometimes reaches, it's mind blowing. The types of formulations we need to put into the law here in order to prevent these companies from circumventing it is stuff like refusing consent shall not be more difficult than giving consent, right? Something so obviously decent that you would think anybody who designs an online interface would do in any case. And no, this is not the case. You literally need to write it into the law to make people respect it. Since I've got the mic, I just want to go back to the question that was posted in the chat. To what extent the kind of the limited ban on targeting based on sensitive data can be effective? I think that's a really good question, and I can only partly answer it. I think partly we'll just have to see, and it will depend on how strong the enforcement of the DSA rules will be in Europe. So how strong the regulators will actually go after those companies. So the wording of the provision that was proposed that in the Parliament position is that targeting or amplification techniques that process, reveal, or infer this kind of sensitive personal data is prohibited. And so I'm quite hopeful that since that doesn't only say process, but it also says reveal or infer, that some of these kind of techniques that were used to guess people based on information, or to kind of extend profiles because how patterns are if you have a large amount of personal data. I think that may be more easy to restrict with such a formulation as compared to the traditional wording, collection and processing, that we know from GDPR.
Jon, do you want to comment?
Of course. I really think, and I mean, the really good news is the US is on the ball again, because I mean, that's been part of the problem. Dealing with this in Europe by itself is a little bit more complicated. And I think there's always this concern on the European side. Are we doing something that's kind of hurting our businesses, or are we creating some kind of situation? And we've seen that before with companies like Microsoft and the like. They'll do a twist which kind of makes the EU look bad or something. So you have to be wary of that. Now, I think the situation is now a little bit turned on its head. Now, does the EU want to put together a kind of a proposal that doesn't go as far as the Americans? Come on, guys. You don't want to be in that situation either. You have to kind of talk together and come up with a proposal that goes all the way. And I think I would go further than both proposals. As I've said before, we need a solution that basically makes this kind of impossible to do anymore what they're doing. And I think in a way, yes, making it harder is a good thing. But I think the damage that we are seeing is so significant that we need to kind of take this all the way. And I think, again, I mean, referring to the people working at these companies, I think there's a lot of really good people. And I think a lot of them are telling themselves, well, everyone else is doing this, so I guess it's something that we have to live with. But at the same time, every now and then, I've seen people kind of take a stand and say, okay, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I don't want to be, a lot of these people, they're wanting to build a positive world, and they want to be contributing to a positive world. And now they're building technologies which is kind of making the world worse. And I don't think that's what these people have signed up for. And hopefully they will start to make their voices heard, because the reality is, in places like Silicon Valley, there's a lot of strong-willed people that if their voices, if they tell the truth and go out and say what's happening, and they push their co-workers and the like as a team, I think you can see things happen. I think it's time to change. These large companies, they can survive with a change like this. Now, they are concerned about their revenues. They're concerned about the might and the place that they managed to build up. All of them are playing Monopoly. They want to kind of defend their turf and the like. But the reality is the damage that they're doing this is not just about them becoming monopolies, which is bad enough and a separate issue to discuss, but it's something where they're actually damaging the world that we live in. And I don't think any of those guys would like to have that on their resume. So it's time to stand up and do the right thing.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you again for very strong words. And you mentioned earlier the issue of security, and it brings to mind that, I think one of the things that might have changed, and you can correct me, all of you, if I'm wrong, is that we're suddenly seeing that this has a much wider impact on society than in before, where, our counter argument often, but I like seeing ads for shoes. And now we know that it has a much bigger impact on society and individuals than what we before believed. I remember last year, I believe there was a report from NATO saying that this technology was also a national security risk, because you could single out people working in security services, or you can use the tools for influence operations in elections, etc. And I think we have multiple evidences now that has happened and is happening today. And I imagine that there's an opportunity now to continue building new alliances. And having you here today, Jon, is an example of that. Nicole and Jan has both led large-scale alliances, Jan with the Tracking Free Ads Coalition and Nicole in the US with her coalition there. What other movements do you see need to come together now? And I think to sort of make this voice heard, to bring this issue outside the tech bubble. I already think it is outside the tech bubble, but how can we further strengthen the arguments to make both people and policymakers understand why this is an important issue to deal with? Who wants to go first? I think Jan raised his hand. Do you want to go first, or anyone else?
Sure, I just don't want to monopolize the space if anyone else wants to come first. Otherwise, I just want to say, I mean, your point is really spot on. I mean, the freaking NSA and CIA have reportedly ad blockers to protect the security of their networks. It is an absolute security risk. Also because advertising is often, loaded from untrusted third parties into your browser, and obviously that creates a big risk for all kinds of hacking, especially if you're a high value target. In terms of alliances, what is the most surprising thing for me in all of this is that until today, most of the large publishing houses, at least in Europe, but I guess in the US as well, have sided with big tech in favor of surveillance advertising, even though all of the research that I have seen at least points to them actually being severely hurt by the current advertising ecosystem. They're losing, for the past 10 years, they've been losing advertising revenue every year. And they're losing more and more of that to the big tech companies, to ad tech companies. And yet they continue to defend the system as if it was vital for their survival. Yet they have lived very well on advertising long before Google and Facebook were around. And it's just beyond me why, if that is just a lack of vision or a lack of foresight, or if they have, or if the surveillance advertising system has been around for long enough so that all of their marketing people maybe have already grown up in this system, they can't even imagine anything else anymore. It's quite sad for me to see. We've tried actively to reach out to publishers and individual newspapers as well to try to see how they would imagine an alternative online advertising ecosystem. But the results of those conversations were, from our point of view, rather disappointing. I'd be very curious also to hear more from you, Nicole, what your experiences are in the US there.
Jan, I'm glad you brought that up. The role of advertisers in surveillance advertising is something we haven't touched on really quite yet. And, between Google, Facebook, and Amazon, those three companies own about 90 or more than 90% of the digital ad market. Not only that, there have been, a couple weeks ago, some documents were released as a part of a legal suit in the United States that shows Google and Facebook at their highest levels, at the CEO levels, have essentially colluded to price fix on ad auctions. And there's also a number of studies that demonstrate on $1 of advertising, digital advertising, you see less than 50% of that, maybe even less than that, actually goes towards the advertising. And so there's almost this cult of silence that exists in the advertiser business and the marketer's business. And it makes me wonder, if there's kind of an unspoken agreement that we're not going to speak out. Nobody's going to rock the current system. But I have to imagine that there are shareholders and board members of some of these companies that should be asking, if you're spending millions or billions of dollars every year on digital advertising, you really do need to ask yourself, where is this money going? Is it actually benefiting our bottom line? And how are we contributing really to the downfall of democracy through the surveillance ad infrastructure?
Jon, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of points that I wanted to make, and one of them is about actually data collection. and security. We were into this a little bit, and I wanted to make a comment there. And one of the concerns that I have personally is the fact that our profiles are being collected and you should be able to download them, which is actually an interesting thing because that's been a request in some ways. You should be able to download your data. The problem with that, now you may remember that we've had massive security breaches, right? Like the Yahoo one where kind of 500 million accounts got compromised. Now think about 500 million accounts or a billion or 2 billion accounts with the level of data that is being collected by a Facebook and a Google actually getting into the hands of someone. Basically everything that you, like on Facebook, what you're reading, how long you watch videos, I mean, the amount of details to this and an analytics of where are you in the political square, what are your sexual preferences and the like. I mean, even which is kind of things that they're kind of inferring from this, and I really think that data is dangerous, and I mean it shouldn't be kept, and it's an example of something that is really serious, and it's part of the security concept that okay, you can hack data, that's one thing, and then the other thing is you can buy access to people, which is another. And I really think that that's something that we need to look into. And now I think it's good that we're collecting notes. And again, I think there's with a lot of this, and I think maybe the reason why sometimes it's difficult for people to make the right decisions on this is not necessarily understanding the consequences of the actions. And when companies like that are, like you say, that are losing their revenues, whether it's publishers or otherwise, they have a model that they have today. Taking that away, they're afraid. They've been told, okay, now that would mean that the advertisement wouldn't work. Now, it used to work better, but for them to kind of realize that, I mean, that's a risky situation, taking away what you have today, which is, I mean, you have something in the hand and the like. So I think that's one of the complications, but I think a lot of them, they're not liking that their revenues are basically being stolen, because what's really happening is that content that they write or some maybe copied and then utilized in other situations or rewritten, or just stories that are made up, which are then going into people's feeds and are stealing the traffic away from those services. I mean, that's part of the equation as well. But this is a lot of this is a little bit complicated. But the simple thing is basically, if we were to go back 10 years now and use the models that we had then the world would be better. And a lot of these companies that are now struggling, the publishers, which I think is really important that they have the funding to do what they need for free press and the like. We need to get back to a situation where they can sustainably make revenues and without having to go behind paywalls, because the reality is when quality content goes behind paywall and low quality content at times is free, then you get a worse situation with regards to information. And I think that's also part of the situation that we are actually seeing today.
Thank you, Jon. So you don't believe in the argument that if people like us get it our way and get a ban on surveillance advertising, consumers will have to pay for being on the internet?
No. I mean, why would they have to do? They didn't have to do that in the beginning. There was plenty of these companies that were doing quite a lot better at that time. I think we were seeing at the time some of these companies making tremendous revenue growth as they moved over to the digital space. I mean, in Norway, you can look at Schibsted as an example that actually in the beginning, they were always losing money, but then gradually as they moved their paper content over to the digital space, I think they did quite well. As an example of that. And obviously there's always winners and losers when you have system change, but the reality, it was possible to do quite well with publishing content on the internet, and I think we need to get back to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Jan, I see you raise your hand, and I'll give also the floor to Nicole. Just two questions that I received here, if I can find them. What are the similarities in the framing in the US debate and in the EU debate, as you see it, and what are the differences? See if I can find the other question. I can't find it right now, but we can start with that, but also make your other points as well.
I just wanted to add on top what John just said, and also to be fair to some of the publishers are actually quite progressive. It's not like they're all the same. So you have newspapers such as Die Tageszeitung in Germany, or The Markup in the US, or TechDirt, which is a smaller tech blog, who decided to either do not any advertising at all, or at least they don't use tracking like surveillance advertising. They would just use context-based advertising. I guess there are others out there as well who do this, and I think this is an encouraging sign. So it appears that this works as well. I let Nicole speak to the differences, or kind of in terms of narrative in the EU, or what you said in the EU and the US.
That's a really good question, and I don't know that I can speak to it fully, but I think something that we've seen in the US context is there is a continued need to educate consumers around the harms of surveillance advertising, and also the monopolization of the digital market and the tech market and social media companies, especially. We have a lot of issues right now in the United States, and helping consumers and citizens understand that reforming our digital democracy would go quite a long ways towards reforming democracy writ large is something that I think we're still working on and still trying to crack that nut. And, part of this also comes from the administration. President Biden has been really outspoken about his belief in reining in big tech and putting some common sense limits on these companies. And yet we'd like to see him take a stronger stance on the work that's being done in the EU, because in a lot of ways, the progress that's been made on the DSA and the DMA, but the DSA in this context will really achieve his vision for global democracy and reigniting global democracy. But to date, his administration has been quiet on that front. And it is an opportunity for him to take a leadership role and I think unite the vision that he has with what is happening in the European Parliament right now.
Thank you. I'm encouraged to hear that, also what happens on one side of the pond inspires what happens on the other side of the pond. And I can remember we were working into the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue. This is one of the things we've been doing, is to bring US groups to Europe to talk to members of the European Parliament. And then we're invited back to speak to members of Congress about how we're doing things in Europe. So I think having also more cooperation this way, and also globally for sure, on these issues is really important to achieve change. And I'm going to read out a question here, and it starts by sorry, so it's always good. Sorry for bringing up the N word, but what about the metaverse? What challenges for tracking ads / regulation? ? Who feels called to ask? I guess it's a general question about, going forward, technology is going to be more immersive. It's going to be closer to a body. VR, the Financial Times revealed this week, but the patents from Facebook, they can track your eyes, and basically your eyes will reveal your emotions, right? You can't hide your eyes when you're looking at things. So yeah, the future, Jon.
Yeah, I mean, there's the future, and then there's what we have in reality. And I'd like to start with actually reality. And part of the issue there is that you're now having companies. There's a little startup in Norway as an example of that is collecting real world information and combining that with the online information. They were solving, and I'm more or less reading from what they wrote on their site. They're solving the problem that you don't have the level of information from the real world that you have in the online world. So there's multiple ways to solve that particular problem. And one of that, in their case, is using Bluetooth technology to be able to follow you inside buildings and see potentially what you're looking at. Then, you combine that with your credit card information and the like. So you're able to follow a person, not only what they're doing on the online world, where you're kind of tracking everything, but you can then actually see that a person goes into a store, looks at a certain dress, and then ends up buying it in the store. those kind of information is obviously scary. And if you take that potentially into the metaverse, a company that is so much collecting everything that we do, we want them to be in our virtual world as well, kind of where we are kind of engaging with our friends and the like and collecting information. That's not good. Now, obviously, VR is not new, and I mean, we can be excited about the potential of the technology, and there's a lot of cool things to be said about this. But the reality, certain companies should not really be allowed to deal with this at all, because this should be a space where you can do things without your every move being tracked. And again, both in the real world and the virtual world, please don't collect our information. Don't spy on us. Don't spy on us online. Don't spy on us in VR, and don't spy on us in the real world. It's just wrong.
Thank you, Jon. And we're gonna very soon start asking for your concluding remarks. But Nicole, briefly, and then I'll ask you a last question.
Sure. Just to add on that last point, I think all of us agree that the internet has done a lot of good, and we are pro-internet on this panel, which, by the way, is something that big tech likes to paint civil society groups and nonprofit groups as completely against technology. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that technology is capable of bringing people together in real, genuine ways. That being said, we're in this position right now because big tech has designed all of their products around growth, not around people. And, if we're going to look at the metaverse, and first of all, the metaverse sounds like my idea of hell. If you've read, there's like stories of harassment in the metaverse. It sounds like all of the worst qualities of the real world put online. But again, I think the metaverse is being designed with a profit orientation, and we're going to end up with some of the same problems in that iteration of the internet if we allow companies to design the framework and there is no regulations or framework put into place by governments, by civil society, by people. People should be asked for their opinion in how the online society and our digital democracy works.
Yeah, democratic governance and participation. And on that note, I want to ask all three of you a question. So we have had a fantastic event today. There are lots of really interested people watching here now. And so what happens now? Both very briefly from all three of you, what can we do as organizations? What do we need to do in our member states, in our countries? And what can we do as individuals? Something along those lines. Who wants to go first? Jan?
I can start concluding remarks. What can we do? First thing, don't use big tech. Don't use companies' products if they're built to spy on you. I think that's a really kind of straightforward thing. And the second is, if you do have time, if you're based in Europe, I guess in the US it's the same thing, write to your elected representatives, write to your members of parliament, of the European Parliament, whoever you can find an email address for, tell them that you hate being spied on and that regulation needs to solve this.
Thank you. Jon?
Yeah, so on my side, I really would like to kind of reiterate the importance of going far enough with the proposals that we have on the table. Make sure that the proposals actually solve the problem. Halfway, if you go halfway and it doesn't solve the problem, it may actually make the problem bigger. Make sure you go far enough. And because it's easier to go the other way afterwards, maybe saying, okay, we can lessen the screw a little bit here or there, kind of with regards to what you're able to do or not able to do. But I think it's really difficult if you go there and you put out a solution that doesn't solve the problem, then we're nowhere. So we have to make sure that the solutions that are provided, that they go far enough. I think all of you that have an opinion on this, make your words, make it heard. tell people what to kind of, like I said, write to the people that have the power. And also, if you're inside those tech companies that are doing bad things, make sure to have your voice heard as well. A number of you have done that, and I think it's really valuable when you do that. And I think it's important that we all, I mean, we that work with technology, the reason why we are doing this is because we want to make the world better. For me personally, on the internet, giving people access to the internet and the wealth of information that's there, it's a beautiful thing. I don't want to see it destroyed, and I know a lot of you agree with me. We want to do the right thing. We want to make the world better, so let's do everything we can to contribute to a better world and move technology forward at the same time.
Thank you so much, John. Nicole?
I'll be quick. We're at time here. I agree with everything that has been said. So just to add to it, talk to your friends and family about these issues. You're here because you understand or you want to understand these issues more. Most of the world does not have the level of understanding around tech and the surveillance economy and surveillance capitalism. So conversations with your friends and family and your children are really, I think, the best place to start to understand how to make a difference on this issue. Thank you, Finn.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. I recommend you to follow Edry, to follow Vivaldi, and to follow Accountable Tech on all their great work. Thank you so much for participating, for asking questions, and I really hope that we all stay in touch after this conference as well and keep working on the good issues. Thank you. And I see the wonderful Jennifer Baker in my window here. Great to see you, and I guess the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, the wonderful Finn Meerstad, for that fantastic wrap up and for that final panel. And also to you guys joining us from Room Bob. Diego was moderating there, so thank you to Diego as well. We have made it through to the end of Privacy Camp 2022. It's been a challenge, some technical hitches, and of course the downsides, the unfortunate thing that we can't all gather over a glass of wine or a shared coffee to say what we all thought of it today. So hopefully in coming years that will come back, but we're celebrating 10 years of it, so at least we were all able to gather today. There's been a lot of content. If, like me, feeling a little overwhelmed, you were taking notes, perhaps give yourself a breather and come back in a day or two and look at the recordings so that you can refresh your memory. But you can still keep using the hashtag on the whatever social media of your choice you prefer to use to share the word and to share amongst your friends and colleagues. I'm going to hand over now to Claire Fernandez, Executive Director of Edry. There's a lot of thank yous to go around, Claire, but I will leave it in your capable hands to do that.
Thank you so much, Jen. And wow, what a day. It's been indeed very rich and long, so I'll be brief to let you go on to your lives. Indeed, there's a lot of thank you, and I would like to start by thanking all of you who attended some of or all of the panels today. It's really great to see so many of you connecting, and I hope that this day will also leave behind more discussions on social media and throughout the recording. So thank you so much for all of you. Thank you for the generous support of the EDPS again, and it was a very interesting EDPS Civil Society Summit around lunchtime today. And also thank you for all of our other partners and funders, including Epic, Mysterium Network, Nextcloud, Vivaldi, as we just saw, and much more. Thank you very much. I would like to thank really the content committee, as they're called, and especially our own Edry Andrea Bellu, but also Gloria Gonzalez and Rocco Bellanova for putting together and crafting these incredible panels. Thank you, to the panelists and to everyone who moderated or spoke today. Thank you to the content advisors. This year, we really find it important to also use your expertise. So I would thank Nakima Stefbauer, Samarika Luz, and Scott Skinner-Thompson. Thank you so much for giving your inputs to these panels. And last but not least, thank you so much to Guillermo Peris for organizing yet another great Privacy Camp. Even though it was online, it's a lot of work, and I'm sure all of you were in touch with him. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the volunteers who've taken some notes to be able to craft and to continue this discussion and send you some notes. Thank you to SEMFCO for hosting the discussion and putting their great platform to us so that many of you could attend the days. And thank you to Danimo for the live stream. And also, I would like to extend the thanks to all the EDRI team, Victoria, Gail, Katarina, but also all of you who moderated or spoke to our panel. So thank you so much. It's been really, a rich discussions, and I couldn't attend all of the panels, and I look forward to watching some of the recording, but some of the main takeaways show to us, especially as we discuss, whether human rights can be at the center of digital policies, or who is being left out by this discussion on digital rights. I think we've discussed, some of the limits of the data protection of privacy framings to address all of the issues of our times, and especially in times of big data, the importance of seeing digital rights generally as one of the other collective instruments that movements such as the digital rights movement can use, for people, democracy, and the planet. Another big takeaway, and that also was one of the takeaway of the last panel I attended on where we are in terms of midterm mandate, is that it's really important to build coalitions across movements. And that we cannot do it, deal with the challenges alone. Some of you have spoken of a tsunami or an avalanche of digital rights proposal and digital policy proposal in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So it's very important we build these coalitions. So what are the next steps? First, I will ask you to please take a minute to share feedback with us and fill in the evaluation form. We will also share it by email, but if you can do that in 5 minutes now, we'll be really grateful. As I said, we will be sharing visualizations from the panels, but also some notes, so you can continue engaging on the conversation. I would normally say that what comes next is CPDP, but because of the pandemic this year, it could not happen in the month of January. So, there will be other dates. And of course, we look forward to seeing you at CPDP and other events happening until then. I would also, like to continue inviting you to support some of our campaigns, especially the Reclaim Your Face campaign that EDRI and partners are leading, or some of our work around platform power. So it's very important that you continue, supporting this work. And if you are able to as well, to make a donation, because it's quite important that we are able to continue in the face of, increasingly huge corporate lobbying that we are facing at the EU level and also in member states. Please take a minute to follow our work, and subscribe to our EDRIgram, our newsletter. And I would also like to invite you to look at the projects that we are leading together with the Digital Freedom Fund around decolonizing the digital rights field. I think Anna, in her opening remarks, and several of you have mentioned it throughout the day, but I think it spoke to why we're holding that theme today with Privacy Camp, and why do we need to also self-reflect about the composition and the dynamics within our movement. And with that, I think I will also invite you to come into video if you can. Some of you who are still around would like to take a group picture. And then I also leave you in the capable hands of Jen and other of our colleagues to try to take that picture. Thank you very much, and thanks to Jen for a wonderfully facilitated day. Thank you for being with us, and looking forward to more editions of Privacy Camp.
Thank you, Claire. Well, I'm just here as a cheerleader and really enthusiastic at this point. I can see everyone gradually switching on their cameras. I suspect Guillermo is probably the technical genius behind this. So perhaps if we get as many people with their cameras on as possible, And then whoever's going to take the picture, I guess you can go into settings and prioritize video. And that should give us a nice collage that we can take a picture of, especially if you want to check out what you look like. Come on, we need another couple of people to fill up this collage. I know we can't meet in person, but it's worth having at least a shot of all the people waving at the camera. Okay, 3, 2, 1, big wave. Thanks everyone. Thanks Sock Puppet at the bottom. I hope someone's taken a screenshot of that. All rights reserved and privacy protected as well. Have a good evening.